In this video, I'm going to go over how to use this and a bit of a how-to and a review. And I've divided the video up into the following sections. So the first being the introduction, the second being about all these lances or attachments or clip-ons or whatever you want to call them that come with it. And then I'll talk about this power control gun here. The next section being how to pack it up and start it down safely, so the best practices in actually operating this tool. And then I'll move on to my final conclusions or my review. Now, before buying this, there's two accessories that you need with this. So the first one being a garden hose, and a garden hose with a plastic clip connection. And the other thing that you may need to purchase as well is an extension cord, because although it comes with a power cord, it's 5 meters. And so that's the introduction. So now let's move on to the next part of this video, being all the attachments and how they differ from one another. So first, let's talk about the Vario lance. And Vario is short for variable length. And so one handy feature about this is that you can actually change the amount of pressure that is coming out of the end of this tool. And the stream that comes out of it is just your boring straight line, and there's nothing too fancy about it. Now, to adjust the power that comes out of this, it's not actually controlled from here. This purely indicates what is actually coming out. And all you need to do is basically just have the tool and then sort of just twist it like so. And so the question can be raised, why wouldn't you just always have it on the hardest mode? And for 90% of use cases, this is what you'd be doing. But you put it down to the softest mode if you're spraying detergent, and I'll explain more about that later on. So now I'll move on to the Dirt Blaster. And this thing really lives up to its name. And so this pretty much can only be operated on maximum power mode. And this is great if you just want the power of Poseidon applied to those really stubborn concrete dirt stains. And the way this works is that it just constantly sort of basically attacking the stain from all sorts of angles, and eventually it comes loose so much quicker than it would be if you're just shooting from the same pouring stream. I know it doesn't really sound like it'd make that much of a difference, but as you can see in this footage here, it just works so much more, it just works so much faster and easier than what the Vario Jet does on its maximum setting. And now to my favorite attachment, and that is the T5 Racer Surface Cleaner. And the way this works is that it actually uses the water pellets coming out of here to spin this little tool here. And as it's doing that, it's shooting water out of these two nozzles here. So it's a very similar principle to the Dirt Blaster, except it just does it on a much larger scale. How wide is this? 33 centimeter diameter. If you're cleaning a footpath or a driveway or basically anything that's made out of cement, I'd strongly recommend that you get this up front. And just to really prove my point, I'll just demonstrate some footage here of the differences between the three lances, just so you can see how much effort it is required to get off the same bit of dirt for very similar types of areas. Now, on this tool as well, you can also adjust the power setting for what's coming out of this. And so why wouldn't you just always be operating this on maximum pressure mode? Well, if you're using this on stone, cement, concrete, anything like that, you would always be operating this on the maximum setting. However, you may put it down to a medium or soft setting if you're using this on woods, say like your deck, or if you're using it vertically on a fence. Now, one metaphor that I like to use with the Dirt Blaster and the Surface Racer Cleaner is that this is very similar to a Whippersnipper, and the T5 Racer Surface Cleaner is very similar to a lawnmower. And so it'd be very tedious if you're trying to mow an entire lawn with just the Dirt Blaster. But at the same time, you still need your Dirt Blaster or your Whippersnipper just to get into those corners in which you can't quite get the Racer Surface Cleaner right into, or your lawnmower right into the edges of certain places. And so yes, you can get away with not having the Vario Jet, especially if you're not using detergent, but these two really are handy if you use them in combination and use them both for their appropriate strengths. Alrighty, so that is the lances covered, so now let's move on to what we actually attach these lances to, and that is the trigger gun. This is actually a very handy tool. Press this here, and then you can detach it, and then also press it back in, and then you can put it in again. And for the other end, it's a pretty simple process. Just goes in sideways like this, goes in, rotate, and easy done. Now, another handy thing about this too is that you're probably wondering what this little black thing is here for. That is a safety mechanism. Now, one thing that you may notice here is that you'll see this little indicator here. And so, while we're talking about all the different levels, in what circumstances would you be wanting to be operating at 3, 2, 1, and mix? Well, mix is if you want to put in a detergent. And to put in a detergent, all you have to do is just get the bottle that comes with it. Now, take this cap off and then put it upside down into the holder here. Now, I made a mistake that pretty much every single person who ends up purchasing a K5 makes. And it is a massive design flaw. In fact, I'm amazed that Karcher still sell this product with this design flaw. This is really a case of Karcher getting all the hard things right and just stuffing up something that is so easy. And so with this, you assume it's some type of pop top thing, and the way it's shaped, you assume it's basically just a thing where you have to sort of stab it into because there is a little spear in here. But unfortunately, if you apply any more force that's beyond the weight of this bottle, like even just a tiny little push, it actually breaks the mechanism inside, and then you can't get detergent in. And so I actually made this mistake, and then I had to apply detergent just using a separate sprayer on the cement before I actually applied the pressure cleaner to it. If you do actually decide to do this and you manage not to break it, just take the cap off, put it in upside down very gently, never apply more than the weight of the bottle itself, and then just put this down to the maximum soft setting, and then you'll notice that when you squeeze the trigger, it'll come down to a bottom mixed setting here. Alright, so now let's move on to number 1. Well, this is ideal to use if you want something that's just slightly stronger than a garden hose. So say you can use it on bikes or old wooden furniture or even delicate sandstone. And so now let's move on to number 2. And the ideal use case for number 2 is plastic furniture, and also cars and motorcycles. Now just bear in mind that you want to be very careful when you're using this tool on cars, because it can take as little as half the capacity of this tool to accidentally strip paint. You really don't want to be standing too close to the vehicle, and you really don't want to be using 3 if you're washing your vehicle. So just be mindful, if you are washing a vehicle, don't go beyond 2. Now, what about adjusting this to number 3, or the ultimate power mode? Well, to put it bluntly, this is why you've paid almost $1,000, as it provides 2,300 PSI and it's powered by a 2,100 watt motor. And so this is ideal for cleaning stone, asphalt, cement, and metal. And when I say metal, I'm talking about removing things from the metal. So if there's paint on a metal, I wouldn't be using this, and as you can see in this demonstration here, it doesn't rip the paint clean off, so you can't use it instead of a sander, but it is enough to do unwanted damage. Just one last little thing I should talk about with the trigger gun as well. It comes with this very handy attachment where you can actually pull it through here, and then if you need to wind it back in, it's just use this little wheel here. Nice and easy, and it has about 10 meters of range. Alrighty, so now I'll move on to the next section of this video, and that is how do you actually operate this, and how do you operate this safely? I'll go from the very beginning. And it turns out that Karcher have taken some inspiration from IKEA. We have to assemble half a thing out of the box. And I've got a separate short video where I just basically go through all the steps on assembling this tool. Now, this tool weighs 17 kilograms or 38 pounds if you're from like one country that measures things that way. So let's actually get started now. The first thing to do is you plug in the garden hose and turn on the tap. And on the back, you have this power cord here. There's one more step to do before flicking this on switch. And so that is with the water on and the power connected but off, you then just squeeze the trigger and let it flush out all the air from the plumbing. And so this may take a short while because there is 10 meters of cable here, and you also have to factor in what air is stuck in your garden hose as well. And so just basically just let it flush out all the air. And so why do we do this? Well, it's not very good for the pump to be constantly fluttering between air and pumping water and pumping air and pumping water. It just gives it lots of little micro shocks. So now you can flick this on, and then you'll notice that when you squeeze it, you'll have lots of pressure coming out, and you'll see the pressure going up on the little indicator here. Now, one thing that's very good for housekeeping is that you have to appreciate that there is 2,300 psi or 158 bar shooting through this hose here. And so you want to be taking reasonably good care of it, so don't let it get kinked, don't step in it, don't drag it around corners. And I know in the real world that's much easier said than done, but now in this B-roll footage you probably noticed that I'm very PPE heavy, and there is some reason for this. The thing that's the most important about this is to wear some form of eye protection. And that is because for the amount of power that's shooting out of this nozzle here, you do actually get ricochets flying back up. But I actually felt bits of dirt hitting my face when I was getting a bit too close to things. And so it's a very good idea to wear safety glasses. Another thing you probably noticed that I'm wearing as well is hearing protection. Technically this is sort of on the borderline for whether, if you're listening to this for long periods of time, whether it's going to do any damage or not. I am erring on the side caution here. But another benefit about wearing hearing protection as well is that people are less likely to interrupt you, which would end up dragging out your work time. With this thing shooting at 2,300 psi, it can take as little as 1,000 psi to penetrate skin. And with water injection injuries, they may initially seem very mild, but if an infection gets in there, it can turn into something nasty quite later on. Usually when we are pressure washing, we are cleaning some pretty dirty areas, and the risk of infection could be pretty high. And so that's why I always make a very big point of wearing enclosed footwear. And with that being said, obviously don't aim this at people or animals. And the last thing you probably really do not want to be aiming this at any type of electrical outlet. And so I know this is pretty common sense, but people have been electrocuted using pressure washers, so I feel like I should actually mention it. Alrighty, so let's just say now you've been pressure washing away, you've had a great day, and now you want to actually pack this tool down. It may just be tempting to unplug everything and put it back into storage. And if you live in a warm part of the world, and if you use this like every day or every second day, you can do that. But what we want to be doing is we want to be unplugging the garden hose, but leaving the power connected. And pretty much the opposite of what we did when we started this up, we now want to be flushing out of the water out of this line, so it's only air sitting in the line. And so the reason why we want to be flushing out of the water out of the line if we're storing this for a long time is for a couple of reasons. One being that it prevent the buildup of mold, and the second reason being is that if you're not constantly flushing this out, what will happen is you'll get a buildup of lime scale. And it'll sort of build up and get thicker and thicker and thicker until eventually it'll get to the point where it's impeding the performance of the machine. It's kind of similar to a person having a bad diet and the arteries getting clogged up. And the third reason being is if only applies to people that live in countries where the temperature drops below zero, the water that is in the internal plumbing will then turn into a solid, and it could wreak a bit of havoc on the internal plumbing. So, as the old saying goes, if you look after your tools, they will look after you. Now you know how to operate this, but is it worth the money? Well, I'm not going to say an outright yes or no, but I will just point out a couple of things. This tool is approximately about 25% more powerful than the K2, and the K2 is 1/4 of the price of this. However, that doesn't mean that this machine is a rip-off. What that basically means is that the closer that you get to perfection, the more money that you have to spend in order to get slight improvements in performance. And so it is very much a diminishing returns on performance as you get closer and closer to making that perfect machine. And so if you live in a very small apartment and you only have like a small little footpath and maybe a single garage car space, well, I'd say this is very much overkill, and you probably should consider a model say like the K2 or the K3. However, if your house is surrounded by cement and you have long driveways, and you're happy to be spending a bit of extra money in order to save you hours in the long term, well then yes, this machine is worth it. Obviously with the exception of the detergent receiver, because that thing is just very flimsy and it breaks straight away. But the rest of the machine and the main guts of the machine, it is what it states that it is, and it actually performs pretty well. And after using this for about half a day straight, I didn't feel any part of my body overly straining. I wasn't getting back pain, I wasn't getting fatigued forearms from having to squeeze the trigger too hard for too long. And it is very well ergonomically designed, so I do have to give Karcher credit for this. And with this as well, you can do some fun stuff, like you can write your friends' names, you can write your street address in the public footpath, so the postie has an easier time finding your letterbox. This is a very satisfying tool to use when you've been using it for some duration. So that's pretty much everything I have to say about the Karcher K5. Apart from the detergent receiver, I'd say this is an excellent buy, and it'll definitely do the job. As per usual, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.